I never expected an ordinary weekend morning to become one of the most meaningful experiences of my entire life. I was prepared for the usual butterflies that came with learning to drive. Perhaps a few deep sighs or concerned glances from my father, Michael. But what unfolded that morning was something far beyond anything I could have anticipated. It began with a simple lesson in our worn, faithful sedan, resting beneath the sprawling oak tree in front of our house. I had passed by that tree countless times, but on that particular day, it seemed to lean closer, as if listening. What my father shared with me next had nothing to do with clutches, indicators, or blind spots. It was about life, about growing up, and about the silent language of trust. I found myself completely still, absorbing every word. In that instant, I understood that learning to drive wasn't really about the vehicle at all. It was about us, our relationship, and the kind of wisdom only someone who truly understands you can offer. That single morning delivered lessons I never knew I was missing, and the gentle closeness of that experience stayed with me long after the engine fell silent. Be our greetings, dear listeners. Before I share this meaningful chapter from my life, I encourage you to support our channel. Please subscribe, leave a like, and comment below telling us which city you're listening from. Your support means everything to us. .br now. Settle in and enjoy the story. BR. I never imagined myself gripping the steering wheel, fingers slightly trembling, heart racing not from speed, but from anticipation. My father, Michael, sat beside me, composed and encouraging, his hand resting gently on the center console. I had always admired his presence, steady, understanding, with a quiet strength that made you believe everything would work out, no matter what. "All right, Sophie," he said, his voice calm but certain. "Remember our practice. Both hands positioned properly, eyes forward, and most importantly, breathe. Our driving isn't simply about reaching a destination. It's about understanding your surroundings and learning to predict what comes next. BR, are you set?" I managed to nod, though my throat felt tight. I had been practicing for several weeks now, but the possibility of making an error in his presence felt unusually significant. Not because I worried about his reaction, but because his approval meant everything to me. Every word he spoke carried importance, even the simplest observations. BR. We began moving slowly, easing down the driveway. The tires rolled softly over loose stones, and the familiar fragrance of falling leaves blended with the aged leather seats. My father observed me carefully, occasionally humming with quiet satisfaction or offering gentle corrections. BR. Initially, everything focused on technique, how to brake without jolting, when to use signals, how to turn fluidly. But then, just as I found my confidence building, he said something I hadn't anticipated. "Sophie, do you understand why I chose to teach you myself rather than enrolling you in a professional course?" I blinked, stealing a quick glance at him. "I suppose because you wanted to." He laughed softly, a comforting sound that loosened the knots in my shoulders. "Yes, partly bar, but there's more to it. I wanted to be present when you faced real responsibility. Driving tests more than ability it reveals character bar. It teaches you patience, mindfulness, and trust. Trust in yourself, in others BR, and trust in me as well." I swallowed hard, uncertain how to respond. His words felt more substantial than the wheel beneath my palms, yet oddly reassuring. It wasn't what you'd expect during a routine driving session. Yet somehow, it felt entirely right. The roads were hushed that morning, the kind of stillness that seems to hold its breath in anticipation. I had always cherished mornings like this, the soft sunlight spreading across the pavement, the scent of morning dew still lingering on the grass, the distant chirping of awakening birds. Everything felt amplified. Each turn, each stop, each check of the mirror seemed heightened, as though the entire world had chosen to slow down just for this moment between us. As we ventured beyond our neighborhood, the nervousness inside me gradually dissolved, replaced by something unexpected, a feeling of genuine connection. My father wasn't merely giving instructions. He was revealing a piece of himself, a quiet wisdom gathered through years of experience. It wasn't a lecture. It was more like a dialogue, except it happened in the spaces between gear changes and brief glances at the mirrors. Then, just when I believed I had found my rhythm, He posed a question that caught me completely unprepared. "Sophie, what do you think it truly means to understand someone?" I frowned slightly, uncertain if he meant the people around me or if this was some deeper metaphor. "To know what they need before they express it?" He nodded slowly, eyes on the road yet somehow focused entirely on me. "Precisely. Br. And it's more than recognizing habits or patterns. It's noticing the subtle things, the hesitations, the silences, the moments when they're frightened or unsure. That's what makes you a skilled driver. Br. And more importantly, a thoughtful person. You observe, you care, and you respond with respect and patience, even when it's difficult." His words settled deeper than I expected. I glanced at him, feeling a warmth that transcended ordinary affection. It was as if he had drawn back a curtain and allowed me to glimpse his approach to life itself. For a moment, I was speechless, my hands gripping the wheel as if steadying myself against something profound. We traveled in silence after that. The kind of silence that isn't hollow but filled, brimming with understanding, shared memories, and unspoken feelings. I realized that driving with my father wasn't about acquiring a skill. It was about connecting, about recognizing the subtle ways people demonstrate care, and about the quiet power that emerges from mutual respect. When we finally returned to our driveway, I felt a blend of relief and wonder. The lesson had lasted only hours, but what it taught me felt immeasurable. As I parked the car, my hands still tingling from the experience, my father reached over and placed his hand on mine. "You did beautifully today," he said simply. "Better than you realize." I searched his expression for any hint of criticism or judgment, but found none. Br. Only trust. Only pride. Only a quiet love that didn't require grand gestures or declarations. It simply existed, steady and constant. And in that moment, I understood something significant. The lessons that matter most aren't always the ones we anticipate. Sometimes they arrive wrapped in the everyday, in the steady purr of an engine, in the crunch of gravel beneath tires, in the calm, unwavering voice of someone who knows us better than we know ourselves. As we stepped from the car, sunlight catching the edges of the oak leaves, I knew I had discovered something essential. Not just about driving, but about life, about trust, and about the depth of my connection with my father. That morning, behind the wheel, I didn't just learn to operate a vehicle. I learned to observe, to listen, and to value the quiet strength of truly understanding someone in ways that words alone could never express. And for the first time, I grasped that some lessons, though silent, subtle, and unexpected, are the ones that remain with us forever. I never imagined a single morning could transform how I viewed my father. But the more I reflected on that drive, the more I realized I hadn't merely learned vehicle mechanics. I had witnessed a side of him I'd never recognized before. The following day, his words continued circling through my thoughts, like the winding roads we had traveled. I woke earlier than usual, restless, replaying every expression, every pause, every gentle chuckle he had shared with me. That afternoon, I suggested another drive. Part of me wanted to prove my growing independence. Part of me yearned for the intimate conversation from the day before. My father agreed with a knowing smile, the kind that made me feel both small and profoundly understood. We left the driveway, the engine humming like a familiar companion. The streets were quieter now, the sun hanging low, casting amber light across the neighborhood. I experienced a peculiar mixture of comfort and anticipation. Comfort from yesterday's meaningful exchange, anticipation wondering what new insights today might bring. "Sophie," he said after several minutes, breaking a silence that felt almost sacred, "yesterday I tried to teach you more than steering techniques. Did it feel that way?" I hesitated, struggling to articulate the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind. I finally managed. "It felt like you were showing me something larger, about life, about noticing people, about truly paying attention." He nodded, and I noticed the faint creases forming around his eyes as he smiled. "Exactly. There's something about driving, about responsibility and awareness, that mirrors how we navigate life itself. Every choice, every hesitation, every careful observation matters. And sometimes it's not the obvious things that create the biggest impact." I glanced at him, struck again by how much he seemed to perceive, not just the road, but me. It was unsettling and comforting simultaneously. I realized how little I had understood about the depth of his reflections, his quiet methods of teaching me without ever raising his voice. We traveled farther than usual, past familiar neighborhood streets into the older district, where roads curved unexpectedly and ancient trees arched overhead, forming natural tunnels. My nerves heightened. The paths were narrower, the bends sharper, the houses weathered and slightly tilted, as if guarding their own secrets. "You're handling this well," he said suddenly, interrupting my concentration. "Do you understand why?" I shook my head. Because you're observing everything, not just the pavement, but your entire environment. Most drivers don't notice how leaves scatter across the road, how shadows stretch along fences, how the light shifts as the sun descends. But you see it all. That matters. Not just for driving, but for living. His words made my throat constrict. I wanted to express my appreciation, to tell him I noticed him too. But the words wouldn't form. Instead, I focused on the steering wheel, feeling its subtle vibrations beneath my fingers, sensing how the vehicle responded to my guidance. It was like a partnership, each movement deliberate yet alive. I suddenly understood what he meant about attention. It was a form of respect. The quiet stretched between us again, but this time it felt different, comfortable, filled with understanding rather than tension. And then, just as I began to relax, he said something that made my stomach flutter. "Sophie, there's something I've been meaning to share with you, something I haven't mentioned because I wasn't certain you were ready." My hands tightened on the wheel, uncertain whether I wanted him to continue, but his voice remained gentle, patient, steady, the kind of voice that inspired unconditional trust. You're going to encounter moments requiring quick decisions. Moments where the wrong choice brings regret and the right choice demands courage. And sometimes the most valuable lessons don't come from what I tell you. They come from watching, listening, and trusting yourself. That's something I've learned through difficult experience. I swallowed, feeling the weight of his words pressing gently but persistently. There was a gravity about him I hadn't recognized before, a quiet, intensity that made every sentence feel carefully measured. And then he surprised me. "Sophie, I trust you. I trust you to recognize what truly matters, to care for the people and things that deserve it. That's why I'm teaching you myself. Because I believe in you, and I want you to believe in yourself too." I blinked, my vision slightly blurred. Not from tears, though I felt them threatening, but from the realization that this exceeded any ordinary driving lesson. It was a transfer of faith, a passing of something precious that carried love, respect, and trust in equal portions. We continued driving. The world outside softened slightly as I processed everything. The roads no longer felt intimidating. They felt alive with possibility and lessons hidden in the ordinary. I thought about all the times I had felt uncertain, all the moments when I had doubted myself. And suddenly I understood that those doubts didn't have to define me. Not when I had someone like him guiding me. Not by controlling, but by empowering. Eventually, we stopped at a small park on the town's edge. The kind of place that appeared simple from a distance, but revealed hidden corners, rustling leaves, and the gentle scent of pine when you entered. We stepped from the car, stretching our legs, and I realized the journey had given me far more than technique. It had given me clarity. He looked at me, and for the first time, I noticed a faint tremor in his hands, the way he sometimes carried himself as if bracing against something unseen. You're growing up, Sophie," he said softly, "and part of that growth is accepting that life isn't always predictable. People will disappoint you, mistakes will happen, things won't always unfold as planned, but how you respond, that's what matters. How you observe, how you care, how you act, that's what defines you." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words and the truth they carried. I felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the driving lessons, but for his trust, for sharing his insights without ever forcing them, for offering me the gift of seeing the world and myself through a lens of care and mindfulness. As we walked back toward the car, leaves crunching softly beneath our feet, I felt a quiet transformation within me. The tension from yesterday, the nervousness, the uncertainty, had evolved into something steadier. Confidence, yes, but also an understanding that trust, patience, and love intertwined in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. And when we drove home, the sky streaked with coral and gold, I realized the roads we had traveled were more than streets. They reflected the journey my father had been guiding me through all along. A journey not merely toward skill or independence, but toward understanding, compassion, and the kind of quiet courage that endures long after the engine falls silent. That evening, I sat in my room, replaying the drive in my mind, and I grasped something profoundly, impel yet powerful. The most important lessons often arrive when you least expect them, in moments that feel ordinary, from people who care deeply and perceive more than they reveal. And I knew without doubt that I would never forget how my father had spoken, the way he had trusted me, and the way that drive had quietly reshaped my understanding of myself and the world around me. The following morning, sunlight streamed into my room in golden ribbons, and I felt a quiet excitement I couldn't quite explain. Driving had evolved beyond mere lessons. It had become a shared experience, a conversation beyond words, and I found myself anticipating it with a blend of eagerness and reverence. I could still sense the weight of my father's trust from the previous day, a quiet anchor that made me feel capable in ways I hadn't known possible. When I descended the stairs, Michael was already in the kitchen, sipping his coffee and scanning the morning headlines. He looked up, and for a moment our eyes connected. I felt that familiar flicker of unspoken understanding we had been cultivating through these drives. There was something tender in his gaze, patient and reassuring, as if he recognized the person I was becoming and knew he had helped shape it. Morning, he said, his voice low and warm, carrying the comfort I had grown to depend on. Ready for today? I nodded, attempting to mask my nervousness, though he probably saw through it immediately. He smiled knowingly, and in that instant, I realized this transcended driving instruction. This was mentorship, trust, and a rare intimacy between father and daughter that extended far beyond casual conversation. We settled into the car, and the familiar engine hum welcomed us like an old companion. Today, he announced, we would attempt the highway, the stretch I had been dreading most. My stomach fluttered with mixed emotions. I had never ventured beyond our peaceful neighborhood roads, and the thought of merging onto busy lanes made my palms dampen. Sophie, he said softly as I approached the entrance ramp. Remember our discussions. Driving isn't merely about control. It's about awareness. Watch the vehicles around you. Anticipate their movements. Trust yourself to make sound decisions. You can do this. I inhaled deeply, feeling the wheel beneath my hands, the familiar vibrations of the car, the way the road extended ahead. And then, as we merged, I realized I was prepared. I was alert, attentive, and connected. Not just to the vehicle or the pavement, but to the lessons he had imparted about life, patience, and trust. Traffic flowed steadily. Initially, I concentrated on mechanics, lane transitions, mirror checks, signaling. But as minutes passed, I began noticing the world around me in fresh ways. Sunlight glinting off a vehicle's surface, the rhythm of tires against pavement, the subtle speed adjustments as drivers adapted to one another. It was as if my father's words had unlocked a new layer of perception, a way of moving through the world with awareness and empathy. Then, as we cruised along, he said something that made me pause, my hands tightening slightly on the wheel. Sophie, do you understand why I've been so deliberate about these drives? It's not merely about safe driving. It's about preparing you for life, about building confidence when you feel uncertain, teaching you to anticipate challenges, and helping you trust yourself. And more than anything, it's about demonstrating that I believe in you, even when the path gets complicated. I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten as unexpected emotions surfaced. There was such love and pride in his voice, balanced with gentle authority that made me feel both protected and capable. I do trust myself, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And I trust you. He smiled, a quiet, satisfied expression that filled my heart with gratitude. Good.br, that's all I needed to hear. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the highway's rhythm matching our quiet understanding, and then arrived a moment I will carry forever. A sudden merge, a vehicle cutting dangerously close, and instinctively I adjusted the wheel, reduced speed slightly, and signaled just in time. But my father glanced at me, his eyes widening with surprise and admiration. You handled that perfectly, he said, his voice mixing awe with approval. Exactly as I would have done. I felt a rush of relief, but beyond that, a surge of confidence. It was tangible proof that I had internalized not just driving mechanics, but every lesson he had been teaching me: awareness, patience, and trust in myself. As we exited the highway and returned to quieter roads, I experienced a profound sense of accomplishment, but also something deeper, a powerful emotional connection, a quiet gratitude for how my father had revealed life itself through the lens of driving. We parked at a small overlook, offering a sweeping view of our town, the sun now lower, painting everything in shades of rose and amber. We sat in silence for a moment, simply absorbing the view. I felt my hand brush against his on the console, and he didn't withdraw. Instead, he let it rest there, a quiet affirmation of our bond. Sophie, he said finally, today you didn't just drive. You observed. You listened. You acted with awareness and care. That's what matters. That's what makes someone ready for the road ahead in every sense. I looked at him, tears threatening to spill, and realized I had received something far more precious than the ability to operate a vehicle. I had been given guidance, trust, and the kind of understanding that only emerges from someone who truly knows you and believes in you. Bar, I'll never forget this, Dad, I said, my voice trembling, brought by not just the driving. Everything. Bar the lessons, the trust, you. Bar, he smiled, a blend of pride and quiet emotion, and gently touched my high. And I'll never forget how you surprised me, Sophie. How you've grown into someone capable, observant, and thoughtful. That's what makes me proudest of all. As we sat there, wind gently stirring the leaves, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. The drives, the lessons, the quiet conversations, they had given me something permanent. A foundation not just for driving but for life. .br awareness. .br patience. .br courage. And the enduring bond of love and trust between us. That day, I realized some lessons aren't about technical skills. They're about seeing, listening, and understanding. .br. They're about trust, empathy, and connection. And in that moment, with my father beside me, I felt ready for anything the road ahead might bring, knowing I carried his wisdom, his trust, and his love with me always. As we drove home in the soft glow of evening, I understood I had learned far more than navigating streets and highways. I had discovered a deeper understanding of life, of relationships, and of the quiet, enduring ways people show they care.